Canada is finally getting rid of Justin Trudeau.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister.
But who will replace him? Pierre Poilievre is the favourite, a 45-year-old Conservative with a sharp tongue.
We're obviously taking the populist pathway.
What does that mean? Which people would say that?
I don't know who, but...
Well, you're the one who asked the question, so
yeah.
You must know somebody.
Both he and Trump may be Conservatives, but there is one key difference.
I would love to see Canada be the 51st state.
Canada will never be the 51st state of the U.S.
Hello and welcome to the programme. Today we're looking at the end of the Justin Trudeau era and trying to work out who will replace him. We'll be joined by the Canadian rebel Tamara Lich, who was arrested while supporting Canadian truckers resisting COVID mandates. Then we have Stockwell Day, a Conservative politician who gave Pierre Poilievre his start in national politics. And finally, for the American perspective, Scottie Nell Hughes, a Republican commentator and ardent Trump supporter. But first, as we say goodbye to Trudeau, here's a few of his most memorable moments.
Justin Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau's 9 years as Canadian Prime Minister is coming to an end.
Trudeau announced he is stepping down both as Prime Minister and as leader of the country's ruling Liberal Party.
He held on for longer than seemed possible considering the string of scandals and his plummeting popularity. But even Trudeau was forced to accept the inevitable.
A tough decision for this 53-year-old, once very popular leader of Canada.
Extremely popular, globally popular.
I have never seen, the sticker that I saw yesterday in downtown Toronto running through the city with F. Trudeau on the back of a pickup truck. Why don't people like you?
Nepo baby, leader of the liberal world, tyrant, hypocrite. Justin Trudeau is a politician of many faces, including famously...
One picture after another emerged showing him in blackface.
This arch-liberal is the son of former Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, who had dominated Canada in the 1970s and 80s. For the final 5 years of his time as Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau ruled with a minority government, proving that his main political skill was holding on long after he probably should have stepped aside.
After more than 9 years in power and 3 election victories, the political road is over for Justin Trudeau.
You failed Canada! You've ruined our country!
It took his own MPs turning on him to finally bring him down.
There was really a mutiny from Liberal members of Parliament to tell Justin Trudeau he needed to quit.
I'm upset about this because he's not a bad guy. He's just not a great leader.
His political executioner came in the form of Chrystia Freeland.
And just when things couldn't possibly get worse, his closest ally, his finance minister, his deputy prime minister, his friend, has told him, I quit.
It's one of the biggest political bombshells that Canada has seen in quite some time. Chrystia Freeland's resignation.
His deputy prime minister and longtime closest ally quit the government, releasing an open letter accusing Trudeau of costly political gimmicks in the face of threats from Donald Trump. Trailing heavily in the national polls as the 2025 election approached, and having lost his own party, even Trudeau knew that it was time to go.
So last night over dinner, I told my kids about the decision that I'm sharing with you today. I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process.
Back in 2015, Liberals saw Trudeau as an almost saintly figure, with great hair, a handsome face and a bleeding Liberal heart. He swept to election victory, promising an era of sunny ways.
In photo ops, he seemed like the nerd the left had been waiting for. A fighter with a soft heart.
Justin Trudeau is too hot and perfect, and I don't trust him. Cute.
But as the years went by, the scandals that engulfed Trudeau suggested his liberalism was all a show, that his political convictions were merely skin deep.
Another image of Trudeau wearing what appears to be blackface. It is the fourth similar image now to have come to light in the past 24 hours.
In 2019, a series of pictures resurfaced from the past showing Trudeau in blackface. He admitted he struggled to remember how many times he had dressed as the racist caricature. He was forced to apologise.
It was something that I didn't think was racist at the time, but now I recognize it was something racist to do.
Also in 2019, he was accused of pressuring Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould to defer prosecution of a Canadian construction firm accused of corruption. She was demoted when she refused.
Canada's Ethics Commissioner concluded that Trudeau had improperly interfered with an investigation into Canadian contractor SNC-Lavalin and its ties to the Gaddafi regime in Libya.
He says that the Prime Minister did intervene, that he did try to use his authority to inappropriately pressure the former Attorney General, and that he also directed his staff to do the same.
It later surfaced that SNC-Lavalin had been donating to the Liberal Party for years. But perhaps most telling of Trudeau's hidden instincts was the way he dealt with the anti-vaccine mandate protesters of the Freedom Convoy in 2022. It saw him accused of being a tyrant.
I understand the Prime Minister admires basic dictatorships, but let's remind the Prime Minister this is Canada. This is not a dictatorship.
Thousands of protesters and their vehicles entered Ottawa as part of the convoy, bringing the Canadian capital to a standstill. Trudeau took the unprecedented move of enacting the Emergencies Act, despite it being a largely peaceful protest. The act allowed police to use extreme legal powers and heavy force to remove protesters, their trucks, and make a wave of arrests. Even the bank accounts of organisers and people who had donated to the cause were frozen.
Everything is on the table because this unlawful activity has to end, and it will end.
This is a form of fascism going on, and yet he would profess to be the most liberal guy you'd ever meet in your life, and yet he's behaving like a fascist.
A federal court later ruled that using the Emergencies Act was unconstitutional and unreasonable. From then on, Trudeau's support ebbed away. His policies on immigration and housing were proving a disaster, leaving him little chance of beating the Conservatives in this year's election. And his closest allies no longer believed in his ability to deal with Donald Trump.
I would love to see Canada be the 51st state.
And I said that to, as I called him, Governor Trudeau.
So Trudeau won't be around to deal with the second coming of Trump. He leaves behind a complicated legacy. History may not be kind to Canada's Liberal golden boy.
I have always been driven by my love for Canada, by my desire to serve Canadians, and by what is in the best interests of Canadians.
I think our leader, Trudeau, I don't think I've ever heard him say a true word.
Right, let's bring in our panel now. And Stockwell Day, we'll start with you since you've known Trudeau for years and years and years. Are you glad, and is the country glad, that Trudeau's leaving finally?
The country is glad. I don't hold personal animosity towards him. I consider him work together in Parliament. But all of the policies which he tried to impose on Canada, and unfortunately did impose some of them, almost all of his policies, hurt Canada as a country, hurt Canadians. And sad to say, I am glad to see him go because of what his policies did to the country. And those who are following him to lead, they don't indicate their policies are going to be any different.
He was a former drama teacher, and he does seem often, from the more discerning viewers around the world, always to be acting. Is that the case? Is he always acting?
Well, politics is about drama, but unfortunately that's an image that he has brought upon himself, and it hasn't helped him. Canadians want more than anything from a prime minister, somebody who will act for them. That hasn't been Mr. Trudeau. We believe it will be Mr. Poilievre, and that position of looking like the actor has hurt him for sure.
You mentioned a number of issues there, domestic issues, but of course, Donald Trump's just become president of the United States. Has that got anything to do with it?
In terms of Trudeau's popularity, no, other than the fact it's revealed to most Canadians, regardless of how they're going to vote in an election, how unprepared he was, totally not being willing to accept at all. He showed his lack of ability to foresee possibilities that Donald Trump could be elected. And so the lack of preparation has really alarmed people, and it's left the premiers scrambling. So his Donald Trump coming on the scene when Prime Minister Trudeau finally went down to Mar-a-Lago and was seen having dinner with him, and then he got back, and President Trump was referring to Canada as the 51st state and calling Justin Trudeau the governor. Largely Canadians saw that as a sign of Trudeau's own weakness, that he allowed himself to be ridiculed like that.
Tamara, you were arrested supporting the truckers' convoy against the COVID mandates. And of course, this all happens underneath the Trudeau administration. Do you have any ill feeling towards your Prime Minister?
Well, I'm not a fan, put it that way.
Are you pleased to see him going?
I am very pleased to see him going, yes. I think it's long overdue. I think the damage that he's done to Canada is quite alarming, and he can't be replaced fast enough for me.
In particular, some people say the way he handled the protest, which you attended, indeed, were a key part of, revealed that he had very authoritarian instincts. You think that's overstating it?
No, I don't, actually. I think he's very ideologically motivated in the way that he approaches things. As Stockwell said, you know, his progressiveness has just gone. The Liberal Party used to be, you know, center-left, and they've gone so far left now that they're almost unrecognizable.
And his administration's crackdown on that protest, can you remind us what some of those measures were, and tell us if those measures are still in place?
Yes, well, they invoked the Emergencies Act, which replaced the War Measures Act here in Canada for the first time in history, actually. And with that came measures like freezing bank accounts of Canadians who weren't even there in some cases. They just donated from, you know, wherever they were at. Froze bank accounts without a judge's order or any parliamentary oversight, which is quite alarming. You know, I can't believe that we even saw that happen in Canada. And of course, the crackdown with the police. That's where the violence came from that they claim was happening in Ottawa. It was law enforcement against peacefully protesting Canadians.
It's a bit ironic, isn't it? He paints himself to be a virtue signaling liberal, but actually his crackdown on you guys was actually quite violent and quite unusual for Canada.
Very unusual for Canada. Look, I grew up watching things like that happen in third world countries. So to see it happening in Canada at that time, it was unbelievable.
Scottie, the American perspective, does the Trump administration take credit, in inverted commas, for creating the ripples that pushed out Trudeau?
Absolutely. Of course, the Trump administration is going to take credit for anything that he considers to be a positive move for another country. And that's exactly what I think Trump is viewing this for. Make no mistake that Trump and Trudeau did not get along. There's going to be no love lost, and even amongst Trump's whole inner circle, from Elon Musk to RFK, they definitely are not fans of the current administration in Canada. And I think what's happened in Canada was truly sort of the fire that lit a lot of the people to pay attention to what was going on in the United States. The Canadian trucker movement, hands down, inspired Americans to fight back against a lot of those policies during COVID that they felt were overreaching by the U.S. government. And they saw if the Canadians were willing to put their lives in the risk, were willing to stand up to their government, then the Americans could also do that as well. So I give the Canadians and those protesters a lot of credit. And that's what eventually led to, I think, people waking up and realizing about government overreach and targeting political enemies, which was all what got Trump reelected in 2024. So I think right now, looking at what's going on, Trump, of course, definitely does take a lot of credit for pushing, because he knows that, and I think Canadians know, that they need to have someone that's going to work with this administration. I don't think Canadians want to see a 25% tariff on their goods. I know Americans don't want to see a 25% tariff added to our goods that we take from Canada, considering we take billions every single year. So we need to have someone in leadership in Canada who is willing to work with the president on his two main initiatives, which is fighting the drug crisis, which is crossing over our borders via Canada, as well as the immigration and the sex trafficking that's happening on our northern border.
Stockwell, we're going to be taking a look at who might be replacing him a little later in the program. But for now, just want to ask you objectively, is Canada better or worse off than when Trudeau entered office?
By any measurements, a measurement's not done for political purposes, but by any metrics here, Canadians are far worse off than when Justin Trudeau came into power. The over-the-top spending, which sees no end in terms of the deficit it's building, is out of control. That leads to inflation. People are having a more difficult time buying everything from groceries and upwards and clothes. And what his policies have done, bringing in extra layers of taxation now instead of less when people are really hurting. You've got policies that have led to much increased homelessness. You know, I'm in meetings here in Europe, and we do not see the problems in Europe, in European cities, as far as tents and people living on the streets. The same way you do in Canada. That may surprise people, but in our beautiful cities, Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, and others, it's a real problem. A lot of the federal drug policy has to do with that, is increasing the homelessness. Virtually every metric possible.
Right, right, and a very weak, anemic economic growth as well. Look, we're going to be taking a look at Pierre Poilievre, the favourite to replace Trudeau, in just a minute. But before we do that, can we have a listen to the world's greatest stand-up comedian, Norm Macdonald? He was from your country, Canada, but spent most of his time in the United States. Here's his take on Canadian elections.
Hey, big election coming up, and in Canada, this is the difference in elections in America and Canada, is elections in America mean something. You vote for the wrong motherfucker, the world blows up. I don't need that on my hands. Whereas Canada, you know, it's always like, well, what's your view on the bridge?
Okay, back to our panel now. Tamara, Norm Macdonald having a bit of fun with you guys there. But I know that you believe this election is crucial. Why?
I do believe it's crucial. There has been a lot of damage done, as Stockwell was alluding to, with inflation, the cost of living, our homeless people living in tent cities, the problems at the border, and there's a lot of work to do. We need actual solutions to fix these problems instead of just virtue signaling talking points, which is basically what we've been fed for the last 9 years.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, let's look at the candidates lining up to replace him as Prime Minister in this year's general election now. And Pierre Poilievre is the favourite. Here's a short biography.
We will stand up for Canada against any attempts to mistreat our nation. We are all united. We are all together. We are all Canadians.
A straight-talking man of the people, the anti-Justin Trudeau, and odds-on to be Canada's Prime Minister by the end of the year. Pierre Poilievre was born in Calgary in 1979 to a 16-year-old mum who was still in high school. She was unable to look after him, so he was adopted by 2 teachers. He grew up to be a self-proclaimed outsider whose early political views were shaped by so-called Western alienation, which is the idea that Canada's western provinces are openly exploited by the political elite in Ottawa. He first became an MP in 2004 at the age of 25. He was made leader of the Conservative Party in 2022. Many credit him with turning round the party's fortunes. He's odds-on to win this year's election with his dedication to individual freedom and his 4 simple slogans playing on the concerns of the public.
Axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
His satirical videos attacking the government have also won a new audience.
Vote for the motion.
Merriam-Webster equates wacko with psycho, but what happens if they get into positions of power?
He's attracting new younger voters to the Conservatives and raised 35 million Canadian dollars from 20 small donors in his first year as leader. The wider world got to know him thanks to a viral clip showing him dismantling a journalist's question while nonchalantly munching on an apple.
Taking the page of Donald Trump's book, but
what are you
also...
talking about? What page? What page? Can you give me a page? Give me the page.
Poilievre speaks respectfully of Donald Trump and hopes to build a relationship, but he is adamant that Canada will never be the 51st state of the US.
My message to incoming President Trump is that first and foremost, Canada will never be the 51st state of the US. We have a heroic history, a great people, and a very proud future ahead of us.
And he offered no sympathy for Trudeau after his demise.
Canadians desperate to turn the page on this dark chapter in our history might be relieved today that Justin Trudeau is finally leaving.
Interesting fella. Let's go back to our panel and Stockwell Day. You're credited with giving him his first job in the capital. What kind of a man is he?
Great individual. I first met him. I was Minister of Finance in the province of Alberta, and then ran for the leadership of what is now the Conservative Party of Canada. And I met Pierre. He was at university and very energetic guy. He basically headed up our campus outreach across the country to really bring in the youth vote, which we did in a phenomenal way in that particular campaign. And then later on, and I did win that particular race. Later on, when I was in Ottawa as a member of Parliament, Pierre came with me and was my assistant for a while, right up until 2004, at which point he indicated to me he wanted to run to become an MP, which was a formidable task for a young person, and he wasn't on his home turf in Calgary, he was in Ottawa. And I wished him well. It was a long shot, but he took against great odds. He knocked out a very prominent Liberal cabinet minister, went on to win, has had a number of cabinet posts and similar postings in opposition under the Prime Minister, and he acquits himself very well.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier that he'd been put up for adoption by his mother, so I guess he comes from a fairly disadvantaged background, if you like, and he's reached this level purely by his own sheer grit and hard work. How has his background shaped him?
Well, I think it's shaped him considerably because he has learned that life can be tough, and he chose to take life on its terms and face the challenges of that. As you quite rightly identified, he was put up for adoption, and he have had the honor to meet his adoptive mom, and I can tell you, he takes all challenges the same way. He doesn't underestimate them, but he says to himself and to others, look, challenges are there to be addressed and to be overcome. Right. And as Canadians, he's got a great message in that regard.
Tamara, if he becomes a Prime Minister, it's just possible he might do for you what Donald Trump has done for the January 6th protesters, in that he might issue you with a pardon if you are convicted. But before we get down the road, can you just remind our viewers what you've been, what your trial is all about?
Sure. My trial is basically, it's the longest mischief trial in Canadian history, actually. It started in September of 2023, and it was supposed to last 16 days. And we just finally wrapped up this August, and we're still waiting for a decision from the judge, which we're supposed to receive on March the 12th.
The charges, remind us?
So basically, it's mischief.
Yeah, and the charges against you were mischief. I mean, it sounds incredibly quaint in most countries. What does mischief entail?
Basically, mischief in Canada would be akin to spray painting the wall of a public building or, a fence. It's kind of crazy that they're coming at us so hard with these charges.
So then do you suspect that this is a political prosecution as opposed to on its merits?
Well, some days it sure feels like it. I mean, I don't think, we see the other protests that are happening around, in Canada specifically right now that have been going on for the past year, and they certainly have not been dealt with in the same manner that the Freedom Convoy protest was.
Okay, well, we're getting towards the end of the program, Scottie. Pierre Poilievre, do you think he's more likely to get along with Trump than Trudeau?
Well, he sounds like the Canadian version of J.D. Vance, and I think that will have a lot of appeal. He's already said that he has no problem calling back in Parliament to do what is necessary to fight Trump's 25% tariffs, which means that he's willing to work with this president. He's taking him seriously, but he's also not going to betray Canadians, as he did not take it lightly, Trump's 51st state joke. So he obviously still has that same Canada first perspective, which America first supporters do respect. And I think he'll have a much better job, come from a better negotiating point than you have with Trudeau. And I think that's the benefit of both countries at this stage.
Stockwell, we'll just end on that then. The 51st state. Canada is the 51st state of America. That's the one thing that all you Canadians can actually rally around.
Well, it's not going to happen. I remind when I'm in the U.S. Giving speeches, which I do often, I remind them that the Americans tried to take us on in 1812, and we beat them then, burned down the White House, and they haven't dared to take us on in battle again. We've got a great relationship but we stand very, very firm for the things that are important to us in Canada. Tamara, as you can just hear, she's really a model of a Canadian who's willing to stand up and pay the price. She's a rock star in Canada right now. So it's going to be tough negotiations, but look, we've got a long history of being allies. We've gone into wars against common adversaries together. We expect that will continue. Pierre Poilievre is going to be a tough negotiator relative to Donald Trump, but they see the world in some similar ways, and that's a good thing.
A Stockwell Day, Scottie Nell Hughes and Tamara Lich, thank you all very much. Much appreciated. Well, before we go, let's hear one last time from Norm Macdonald and his unique take on Justin Trudeau. Thanks for watching.
It was easy when I was young to vote because it was simply, you just didn't vote for the French guy. It couldn't have been an easier choice. My dad did not like Trudeau. Trudeau was my hero, though. I loved him, And since I've come back, I've been watching the news and everything. I've been seeing Justin, And I thought, by God, this Justin kid, he must be brilliant because his father was Pierre Elliott Trudeau. But then I forgot, he's got a mother.